name's Donna from Evoker, and welcome to the next set of videos in our character creation set of tutorials. This particular set of videos will be going over the sculpting of high-res detail into the mesh that we've created using Mudbox. If you are not familiar with Mudbox itself, I suggest going to the Autodesk website and having a look at their introductory videos. The videos you will find on the Autodesk website will take you through the interface of Mudbox. I won't be going too in depth into this area. I will just be showing you the tools that I use to create the detail in the meshes. Okay, with that said, let's get started. Okay, so we'll start with our pants. So make sure everything else is hidden except for your pants. Go to the top left corner, hit the Max logo, and go to Send to Mudbox. So send to new scene. Okay, so that'll just open up Mudbox and try to import. If you get an error like this, which can happen, it basically means that the UVs of the model that you're trying to import is outside the one-to-one square. So within that checkered square, there's a vertice or something that is outside, or that Mudbox thinks is outside. Even though it looks like it might be inside, which this one does, what we'll do is we'll just apply a new set of UVs. So just quickly go open up the UV editor, apply a box projection, and then hit the layout button. So using one of the layout, so maybe, okay, so make sure all the element is selected, and then we can go over into our modifier tab and we can apply a box projection. This will just do a quick projection around the whole model, and hitting box. So this just tries to lay out the UVs within a box, and then we can hit the custom pack or the normalized pack, one of those ones in the arrange elements tab. So you can play around with whatever axis you want it to be on, but then you just hit the pack normalize or one of those ones there. Make sure that it's all within the one-to-one square, so within the checkered area of the layout tab editor there. So what you can also do is what I tend to do is also scale it in a little bit. So just grabbing everything, make sure it's all done, hitting the scale tool, and then just bringing it in slightly in case one of those vertices that are butting up against the edge there is actually poking over the side. There we go. Once that's done, collapse our stack, save, and then we can send it back to Mudbox, but this time update the current scene. Okay, so now that that's done, we can start to model or sculpt on our model. So obviously there's not enough polygons in this mesh that we've just created to do fine details, so we can add subdivision levels there. So that you can do that by hitting Shift D or using the pull down now. So just do this a couple of times. It'll pop up in the right hand corner telling you how many subdivision levels that you have, or which level this one is. You can turn your wireframe on and off by hitting W, or you can go to display and hit the wireframe, make sure it's checked. So I'll do that a couple of times when I'm sculpting, just to see how things are lying within the grids themselves, or to see if there's an area that will pinch. So in order to go up and down your levels, you can hit the page up and page down button. It's often easier to sculpt on a lower level and then go back up to the top level in order to do the finer details. So you do the big chunky sculpts on the lower level, and you do the higher details on the higher levels. So using a brush, so I'm just going to start with, well, this one's just the grab brush, but in order to start sculpting, I'm going to use the wax. In order to resize the brush, you can you hold down B and and on the mesh. You have to be over the mesh to do this, and M will adjust the strength. So otherwise you can adjust them in the tabs at the side here. I'm just going to start on the folds. So I've got reference up. Just do a quick search on Google for jeans or something, pants. It'll show you where the folds are, and then you can start to sculpt. So just dragging the brush. I should note that I am using a tablet when I do this, but you can still use a mouse. I just find it easier with a tablet. So again, I've also got my concept to the side. Always have both my reference material and my concept open to make sure that I've got the details correct and make sure that I am moving in the right direction. So again, I'm just going to lower the strength here. So I've just typed it in, but again, you can use the M key to adjust that. So you'll just hold M and drag over the mesh. And I've decided to actually start with the pocket. Now I'm thinking just a normal jeans type pocket might be good here, but it really isn't shaping up the way that I want to. So I'm just going to undo that a bit. You can hold shift as well when you use your brush, and this will smooth out your mesh. So once you've sculpted some detail and you want to smooth it out a little bit, you can just hold shift down to do, which is what I constantly do back all the time. So I'll sculpt a bit and then I'll smooth it out a little bit and then sculpt a bit more. So it's a gradual building up of clay in essence. So it's similar to sculpting with clay. You want to build up or cut in to different areas. And a lot of sculpting is trial and error. So try something. If you think something's going to look good, give it a go. Make sure you save. Obviously, make sure you save religiously, especially when you're sculpting. Always save. Always. I cannot stress that enough. Always save. That way, if you do something you like and the next thing you try screws up your mesh or something goes horribly wrong, you can always fall back on that previous save. It's always good to do incremental saves too. You can always go back at a later date and delete the old ones in order to, if you run out of disk space or something, but always incremental save. It'll save your life. Okay, so I've decided to change the pocket style, and I'm going with, obviously it's meant to be more of a cargo pant, so I should be using a cargo pocket. So I'm going to be doing a big bulky side pocket. And again, just using the wax tool to block in where the shape will be. So bring it around the side a little bit more. And again, this is just using the wax tool. All I've done is adjust the strength. I haven't added anything else to the brush. I'm just adjusting the size and the strength. If I hold Control, it'll do the opposite to what the brush is meant to do. So if for wax it builds up in its natural state, if I hold Control, it'll cut into the mesh. So this is just building up the base of the pocket. Again, I've dropped my subdivision level, so I'm not working on my highest subdivision level at the moment. I'm just working on a lower subdivision in order to block in the shape. Once we have the basic shape done, we can move to the higher subdivision level, and that's when we start to sculpt in the finer detail. You won't be able to sculpt in small details in this mesh. Again, I'm just checking my reference, making sure that I'm on the right track. I'm using this reference for the pocket. So it's an overly simplified pocket, obviously, given the style. can create whatever shape that you want. That's what's so good about sculpting. There's a freedom to it. Just do what you think might look good, and if it doesn't, you can always smooth it out and try again. So I'm just blocking in the shape until I get something that I'm happy with. Again, I'm going to just jump down to the knees here now. So on that concept, she has kind of like a patch on the knee. So I'm just going to see if I can block that shape in now as well. Okay, so I'm just jumping around the model. It's always good to not focus too much on one area. You can get a bit stifling. You focus too much, you forget the overall picture. So it's always good to jump around and just, you know, keep it from getting stale, I suppose. But again, everybody works differently, so you do whatever works for you. This is just the way that I tend to work. So I'm just smoothing it out here a little bit after I've sculpted in the rough shape of the patch. So just holding shift to smooth out some of these areas. Obviously we'll be adding more folds, but for now I'm just blocking in. This is all just done with the wax tool. Again, just changing the strength and the size of the brush. Mostly just the size of the brush. Okay, so I'm just zooming out and I have a look to make sure, you know, I'm happy with the overall silhouette and how things are shaping up. If there is anything that I think might look good, I'll give it a go. I was thinking maybe a pocket here, since it's supposed to be a cargo pant. Just thinking where would be the best place to place this. So just lightly sculpting in, just testing to see whether or not I like the look. My reference picture had a second pocket, so I thought maybe it'll look okay. I'm not liking it. So I'm just going to smooth it out. No, I don't like that. So I'll just smooth it out. So like I said, it's just trial and error. If you don't like it, you can get rid of it. Okay, if you want to sculpt on both sides of the mesh like I did with my pocket, I forgot to mention it before, but in the tools tab over the side, it's got mirror, and it'll ask you which side you want to mirror it on. So at the moment I've got it mirrored on the X, so just on the right, underneath the strength, there is the mirror function. So I'm just having a look again. Yeah, I definitely didn't like that pocket, so I'll just continue to sculpt and shape this pocket here. So just smoothing out some of the folds that I've already created around the front there while I shape in this pocket. And I'm going to switch my tool to flatten, so I can flatten out some of the lumpy shapes that have created here. So again, all I'm using is the strength and the size parameters. I'm not doing anything particularly special with the brush itself, so just flattening out the pocket to get rid of some of the lumps that have come into the shape as I've used the wax tool. So again, hardening up some of the edges too, just to give that definition between leg and pocket. So just continuing to flatten out some of the shapes here, and just to further define them and where the edges would be. And smoothing off some of the areas. So again, just holding shift to smooth. And of course working with my mirror on the X. Even though it's mirrored, sometimes I just like to switch sides. I think that's coming along. So I'm going to switch to my sculpt tool here, and I'm going to add a fall off. So that's one of these in the stamp tab over on the right hand side. There's some fall off brushes that you can add. So just playing with these, this will adjust the shape of your brush. So I've also added my steady strokes. I've turned my steady stroke on. So this will give that's that tail that you see as I pull. Move my brush along the mesh. This will help me just keep the line straight. So I'm just adjusting the strength here as well. And basically I'm using this to I want to cut in, so I'm going to invert the brush so I don't have to keep holding control. And again, just adjusting the strength a little bit. But this is just to further define the edge of the brush. So using my steady stroke, I'm just going to outline the pocket, and you can see how it is sharpening up the edge and creating a deeper cut almost into the actual mesh. So again, you can mess around with the fall off brushes. So each one will give you a different shape to your brush. And just smoothing back a little bit here as well. And the steady stroke is just there so I can keep the line straight. I guess it helps me to keep the line straighter. So just cutting in around the edge of the pocket to define that definition between leg and pocket. So here I'm holding control to build up the edge of the pocket. So that's again reversing the brush. So instead of cutting in now, holding control, it will build up. That's because I've got the inverse checked over on the side. Normally it would build up as a default. And just smoothing back a little bit. So I'm just continuing now to build up the pocket and build and shape the pocket. So just smoothing back some of the areas that we've cut into to relax it a little bit more. There was getting a bit of pinching occurring. Didn't look quite nice. So again, just defining some of these edges with my sculpt brush. Just the top of the pocket now. And smoothing that back a bit. Just having a look to see how this is shaping up from the front so I can see the pockets. Now, these pockets are coming out quite a bit from the model itself. So I've just switched my wax tool here now, so I'm going to build up the pocket. But like I was saying, they do come out from the mesh quite a bit. I think I mentioned before in one of the other videos that if we are going to have something that is affecting the silhouette, like these pockets are affecting the silhouette, so when you look from the front you can definitely see the pocket sticking out from the side, you would normally build that into the mesh as well for the geometry to support the normal map. We're not going to do that, or I'm not going to do that with this one. I'm just going to project it straight onto the mesh, which means that the pocket will appear flatter than it actually is, and there won't be, since the geometry is not there to support the normal map, it won't affect the silhouette of the actual character as much. So I've just dropped my subdivisions a little bit here, and I've moved to the grab tool in order to pull this pocket out from the mesh a little bit more. So I want it to be a bit of a bulky pocket, like she's got something in it. I would imagine, since she's always on archaeological digs or something, she would keep a lot of stuff in her pockets. So I'm going to fatten these up a little bit. So just dropping the subdivisions levels down almost right to 0, I think, or 1 would be fine, and just pulling that mesh out where the base of the pocket would be using the grab tool. Okay, so just jumping up some subdivision levels again, and I'll continue to shape this out. So just using the page up and page down to scroll through my subdivision levels. And then I can bring out the top of the pocket a little bit as well. No, I'll undo that. I think that pushed instead of grabbed. I must have lent on control. And just smoothing back. So holding shift to smooth back. Okay, moving through my subdivision levels and just continuing to adjust the shape. So you can see as you move up the subdivision levels, will grab less, I guess, of the mesh, because it's grabbing more polys. It sounds a bit odd, but that's how it works, because there's more density in the polygons when you go up to subdivision levels. It's grabbing more poly, so it affects a smaller area. But because if you go down lower, you you affect more of the mesh. So I'm just zooming out now to have a look at the overall effect. So I zoom right out, because in game you're often at a distance. You don't often get too close. It depends on where the camera is, and of course the style of game as to where the camera will be, but you want it to look good from a distance, because a lot of the time you will be seeing it from a distance. So I'm getting close to being happy with the shape of this pocket. So I might move on. Might start to sculpt in some of the folds, I think. So just switching back to my wax tool. So most of the time I just use wax. I move between wax and sculpt, the occasionally flatten and grab. Those are the ones I work with mostly. But you can of course experiment with some of the other brushes. So I'm just using reference, again always using reference, especially for folds. You want to get them to look as realistic as possible. I'm just going to start to sculpt in the folds here and bring back the fly a little bit as well, since it's got quite lost when we subdivided the mesh. So I'm just going to bring the fly back a little bit so I can see where that is and how the folds will affect it. So just using wax and my steady stroke, and I'll smooth it back once I'm happy with it. So when you sculpt, you're constantly building up. So you start by blocking out your shapes, and then you build up until you get something. Until you're working on the finer details. So just constantly building up, building up, building up. I tend to use with smaller values on my strength, rather than using a larger value in order to build up. I find it easier to work with that way. So just flattening out the front of the fly a little bit. And then cutting in where the fold would be as it moves over the zipper, and around the other side as well, where it would stitch to the fabric. And I'll just smooth that out a little bit. So this side won't be as defined because that is obviously just a stitching of the fabric where it's folded in on itself rather than a fold. Or an overlap of material, I should say. And just smoothing that out. Again, just holding shift to smooth. Once I'm happy, I'll continue on with the folds. So switching back to wax and just adjusting the brush size, and I'm just going to start to block in some of these folds, just using my reference again. In some areas I will be cutting in, so holding control. You want to cut in as well as sculpt on top to add variety to the mesh surface. So just and to define obviously the deeper folds. So again, just adjusting the shape of my brush using the B. Because you want some smaller and some bigger folds obviously, and just smoothing these out. So it's going to be hard to sculpt in this area here where the groin attaches to the leg because of the way the mesh is constructed. We have a triangle here and it's quite a hard it creates quite a hard crease when we've subdivided. Normally you would bring in a fully quadded mesh in order to sculpt, it's better to sculpt on a fully quadded mesh. So that's a mesh that has nothing but quads in it, no triangles. Triangles can cause pinching when you're sculpting, but time doesn't always allow us to do a sculpt mesh on top of our game mesh. So sometimes we are forced to use something that has triangles in it. And you just do your best to work around it, or make it as less visible. So here I've switched to my sculpt tool just to make the fold a little bit more prominent, and then I'm just going to smooth that out again. I'm just trying to hide some of the pinching here. I mean, in this area it can work to our advantage if we're smart about it, because of the amount of fold and bending that this area will do. So I'm not going to be able to get rid of that pinching completely. So I can always just lessen the fold in that area. Don't forget to cut some areas in as well. You don't want to just be building up on your mesh. So I'm just smoothing this area out a little bit. I wasn't quite happy with how that was working, but smoothing it out will adjust the underlying mesh, so it'll be easier to build up on top of. So again, just cutting in some areas and building up in others. I should note that when I'm sculpting folds, there is no fall off on my sculpt brush, so I've turned the fall off. We don't want to go too deep into the mesh. So I'm just smoothing back some of these. So you can see we can't get rid of that pinching, it's always going to be there. But thankfully, since it's the fold of the leg, it'll be doing a lot of moving and animating, so it will be hidden to a certain extent. So I'm just going back with my sculpt and I'm going to build this up a little bit more again. Just a little bit. Seeing if smoothing that back helped us with the pinching a little bit. Doesn't seem to have worked too much on this side. I'm just smoothing this back a little bit more, just holding shift again. I'm just going to drop my subdivisions to see if I can smooth that out and get rid of that major curve there. But you can see in the wireframe mode where the triangle is and where the pinching is forming. So just around that, right on that crease. I'm just going to smooth these right out. We're just jumping up to the next subdivision, and again just smoothing these out. Just smoothing. Switch back to my wax tool, and I'll just start to again just build up some of these folds. Adjust my brush size and flip between the wax and the sculpt. So I'm just going to cut in some of the folds here, and so with a smaller brush you can create a tighter crease, so you always want to vary the size of your brush. We can start to see the creases forming, the folds forming, so I'm just going to just a few more. Again, just building up and cutting in, making sure I keep referring back to my reference. And then once I'm happy, I'll smooth back. Okay, I think we're going to leave this video here for now, and we'll continue on into the next video.